So if you are a researcher or you work in academia, you probably have already heard of the term H-index. In this video, I would like to show you what the H-index is and why actually so many researchers complain about it. It's a single metric, a single number that in some occasions could really determine if you get or not a position, and it might also be quite unfair. So what is the H-index? Well, let's start by a little bit of story, not too much. So the H-index was introduced in 2005 by the physicist named Jorge Hirsch, this guy that I will put somewhere here, from the University of San Diego. So the goal was very simple, to create a metric that measures not only how much you publish, but also how much your work is cited. And that's basically what the H-index is. The H-index of a researcher is, let's say, 10, if this researcher published 10 papers that were cited at least 10 times. So the H-index is really capped around your maximum number of papers because it can get higher than the number of papers that you published. And of course, it's linked to the citations. Therefore, if you have only 3 papers that are cited, all of them 3 times, your H-index is 3. So if on paper the H-index might sound something fair, you're measuring the number of papers or citations, and if we consider the citations are actually a real impact, then fine, the H-index can be considered somehow a fair assessment, right? Well, in the end, it just brings a statistical illusion. And let me tell you. Let's start by analyzing one simple but very, very big built-in bias in the H-index, which is its bias towards productivity. And by productivity, here we mean the number of papers that a person publishes. Because your H-index will never be higher than the maximum number of papers that you have published. So let's make this very simple example. Imagine on one side we have researcher A, which has published 3 papers in a very niche field, but had a very, very high impact in societal change or whatever it can be. And these 3 papers have each, I don't know, more than thousands of citations. So what is the H-index of researcher A? Well, you should know at this point, the H-index is simply 3 because this researcher has 3 papers, each of them having more than 3 citations. On the other side, we have researcher B, which has published 10 papers in a very broad field, in a very broad discipline. These are all, let's say, average paper, and they all got more than 10 citations, but not a lot. Let's say 10 citations, to make it simple. So researcher B will have an H-index of 10, while researcher A, on the other side, will have a H-index of simply 3. So you can understand just from this very little and simple example how unfair it can be if we don't make the comparison properly. And the lesson here is that it's much easier to get a higher H-index if you publish a lot more papers. So if you publish, 100 papers, it's more likely that a good number of these 100 papers will actually reach a certain number of citations, and you will get a higher H-index. So Didier Raoult is a French microbiologist which became very, very famous during the COVID-19 years for his, let's say, very controversial positions. And if I check on Google Scholar, and I did it, and you probably saw it from the thumbnail, his H-index is 225. So I was curious, and then I went to check one of the most famous and impactful scientists that we have had in our human history, which in my opinion is, well, not only in my opinion, which is Albert Einstein. And if I check the H-index of Albert Einstein on Google Scholar again, his H-index is only 128. So if we blindly follow these H-index metrics for measuring impact, we might easily say at this point that Raoult has been more impactful than Einstein. But I mean, it's easy to understand how this is not really the case, right? And the problem here is very simple. So this crazy example, in a sense, really helps us understand what are the limitations of this metric. On one side, we have a microbiologist of the 21st century, which published tons of paper in a very broad discipline where actually each paper is co-authored by many, many, many authors. On the other side, we have Albert Einstein, who worked during the 20th century in physics. And at that point in physics, the majority of papers were single author papers. In this case, the comparison is totally unfair. And the same comparison is still totally unfair nowadays when we compare researchers working in different fields. Every field has their own kind of characteristics, dimension, culture, citation style. So it's very, very difficult and unfair to rely on a single metric. So everything is bad, everything is ugly, but then why the H-index is actually that much used in academia? Well, I can say that the reason might be surprising, but the reason is very simple, and it's simply because it is indeed a very simple metric, and people like to summarize impact in single numbers if possible, right? The H-index gives journalists, administrators, and commentators an easy number to make comparison between people. It gives them a way to decide if a candidate has to go through or not. Obviously, this is not the only number or the only tool to use during a decision process, but it's most of the time one of the main numbers to be looked at in the beginning of the decision process. But we have probably seen at this point, and you have probably understood already, that with simplicity, it comes a cost to pay. The blind search for more citations, more papers to publish, focus on easier to publish papers, has a strong impact on the actual value of the work that is produced by researchers. Somehow, chasing roles in academia, it really goes hand in hand in making your numbers bigger and higher, right? More citations, more publications, a bigger H-index, and all the other weird indexes that are there around. And this obviously comes at the cost of focusing on what is more impactful in the researcher's opinion. Sometimes you're just chasing a trend in order to get more citations, and in the end the reward for real groundbreaking research is minimal if we keep focusing on these metrics. But how do we actually fix this? And I might say I don't have the final solution for you. Finding a perfect solution isn't really easy, especially in an academic system that values volume over quality, but we can definitely do something to move in the proper direction. The first step is to remind ourselves that these numbers are just tools. They are just shortcuts that sometimes can be useful, but they can be useful only when interpreted with a proper context. But let's try to give a couple of directions that actually might be more meaningful than using simply an H-index to evaluate research. First of all, as we saw, it's completely nonsense to use the H-index to compare researchers in different fields. And therefore, one straightforward point to kind of keep in mind is a field normalization of metrics, meaning that we use some normalized metrics based on the field. Each field has its own culture, has its own intensity of publication, number of co-authors, and a lot of different not written rules, and therefore comparing researchers from different fields, even from different subfields, sometimes it's extremely unfair using these indicators. There are also some efforts in trying to introduce some altmetrics, some alternative metrics, such that we have a way to measure the impact of certain research works, not only inside the academic bubble, but also on the real-world impact that a certain article actually had. It's an attempt of really trying to evaluate what a discovery means for the society or as a real-world impact. And what is in the end science if not a slow way of discovering things or inventing things or solving problems that would benefit society and our world in general? So if we keep ourselves in this kind of a bubble of paper citing and reciting each other and not going outside and really making a useful impact, then it's kind of only talking between academics and it's not really helping anyone in the end. These metrics and these indicators really push the research in the wrong direction because they focus on the wrong things and they don't focus on the real impact that the research can make. But in the end, I know that changing things in academia is extremely difficult and extremely challenging, so probably we don't need to focus on fixing the H-index, but we can try to outgrow it and to give it the importance that it should have, which is barely minimal. So my final message to you would be that while working as a PhD student or as a researcher in topics that you have the power to kind of choose, please try to choose something that it makes sense to you as a researcher, that allows you to really try to discover something that could be useful to society in the end, and do not just chase papers for the sake of citations. But if you're watching this video, probably you already have this in mind. So thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments below if you have any suggestions, and I'll see you in the next one.